It was a crisp fall afternoon in the small, sleepy town of Hartsville. The streets were lined with trees shedding their amber leaves, and the quiet hum of suburban life surrounded Samantha Hill as she drove her silver minivan down Main Street. As a mother of two young children, Samantha had long since found comfort in the predictability of her routine. She would spend her days running errands, baking cookies for her kids' school events, and chatting with neighbors. In Hartsville, where everyone knew everyone, life felt safe, secure, predictable. But that afternoon, everything changed. Samantha's gaze was drawn to a figure walking down the street. A teenager about 16 years old. He was tall, dressed in a dark hoodie, jeans and sneakers, and as he walked, his head hung low, his hands tucked into his pockets. He moved with a slight sense of aimlessness, not looking at anyone or anything in particular, just walking. Something about him caught her attention, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He wasn't loitering, wasn't causing any disruption, but there was an unease in her stomach. He wasn't one of the kids from around here. He didn't look like he belonged. As her minivan crawled slowly down the street, Samantha kept her eyes fixed on him, her hands tightened around the steering wheel. What was he doing here? Why was he walking alone? In this part of town, there were plenty of other neighborhoods nearby, neighborhoods where teenagers hung out and where they would feel more comfortable. Why here? Why on her street? Her heart began to race, though she couldn't fully explain why. She had never been one to judge, but there was something about him that set her on edge. He wasn't just out of place. He was wrong for being there. She hated to admit it, but it was the way he looked, his clothes, his demeanor that made her feel uneasy. Her thoughts spiraled. What if he was up to something? What if he had bad intentions? What if he was casing the neighborhood, looking for an opportunity to rob someone? What if he had a knife or a gun hidden in his hoodie? She blinked, pushing those thoughts away. This wasn't who she was it? This was just a teenager after all. Her hand hesitated over the steering wheel as she looked at him again. He was walking toward an alley between two houses, not paying any attention to her. A cold knot settled in her stomach, and before she knew it, her fingers were already dialing the number that had been ingrained in her mind for years. 911. 911! What's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice came through clearly. Samantha's heart raced. She could feel her pulse thudding in her ears, but she tried to steady her breath. Hi. I'd like to report a suspicious person. There's a young black male walking down Main Street. He's crossing into an alley behind some houses. I don't feel comfortable. He's acting weird. The dispatcher responded quickly, asking for a description. Samantha complied, giving all the details she could muster. 6 feet tall, dark hoodie, jeans, sneakers, walking alone. He doesn't seem like he belongs here, she added, her voice shaking slightly. We'll send someone right over, the dispatcher assured her. Samantha hung up the phone, her hand still trembling. Her eyes darted nervously to the alley where the boy had walked, but the figure was already gone, swallowed up by the shadows. She had made the call. She was doing her part to keep her neighborhood safe. That's what she told herself anyway. Minutes later, a police car pulled onto Main Street. Samantha's heart skipped a beat when she recognized the officer behind the wheel. It wasn't just any officer. It was Chief William Hayes, the police chief of Hartsville, tall and broad-shouldered with short-cropped hair, stepped out of the car, his uniform neat and crisp. The way he carried himself, his authoritative presence, commanded respect from everyone in town. Samantha knew him well, having seen him around town and at local events, but she hadn't expected to see him today. Not like this. She hadn't expected to see him walking toward the teenager she had just called the police on. The boy was still standing in the alley, a few feet from the curb. Samantha's breath caught when she saw the two figures come into view. Chief Hayes didn't look like he was arresting the kid or giving him a stern warning. He was approaching the teenager like he knew him, like he was familiar with him. Jordan, Chief Hayes called, his voice a calm and steady echo in the evening air. The teenager turned, startled. His expression shifted from nervous confusion to something that Samantha couldn't quite place. Relief, maybe, or maybe just embarrassment. Dad, the boy said, his voice tinged with surprise. What are you doing here? Samantha's heart dropped. Dad? The teenager wasn't some random kid from the neighborhood. He was Jordan Hayes, the son of the police chief. The realization hit Samantha like a slap to the face. She had called the police on the chief's son. Her stomach twisted as Chief Hayes walked toward Jordan, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "What are you doing out here by yourself, son?" Chief Hayes asked, his tone now more fatherly than authoritative. "I was just walking home, Dad," Jordan muttered, his eyes cast downward, a clear sign of discomfort. "Nothing's going on." Chief Hayes looked up and caught Samantha's gaze. She was still sitting in her minivan, frozen in place, watching the two of them. Her eyes darted between father and son, her face flushing with mortification. Chief Hayes took a few more steps toward her, his gaze sharp. "Ma'am, were you the one who called the police?" he asked, his voice cool but laced with an unmistakable tension. Samantha swallowed hard, her throat dry. She nodded, her face growing hot with shame. She hadn't expected this, hadn't even considered the possibility that she had called the police on the child of someone she knew, someone who was so respected in town. I thought he was suspicious," she stammered. I didn't mean anything bad. I didn't recognize him, and he was alone." Chief Hayes' expression darkened. "You didn't recognize him?" He glanced at Jordan, then back at Samantha. "This is my son, ma'am." Samantha's face went pale. I'm so sorry. I didn't know," she muttered, her voice small and defeated. "Didn't know?" Chief Hayes repeated, his voice tightening. "You didn't know? You saw a young black kid walking alone in your neighborhood and immediately thought he was up to something?" Samantha opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The weight of her own assumptions crushed her. What had she done? She had assumed the worst about a kid simply because of the way he looked. Her gut, her instincts, had led her to call the police on him. She had acted on fear and prejudice, and now she saw how deeply wrong she had been. "I'm sorry," she whispered, barely able to meet his gaze. "I didn't mean to. I didn't think. I thought he was out of place." Chief Hayes' eyes softened, but only slightly. "I understand," he said, his voice still firm, though not as sharp. "But that's the problem, ma'am. You shouldn't have assumed that he was out of place. This is his neighborhood, too." Samantha didn't know how to respond. She felt small, ashamed. Her whole body trembled with the weight of what had just happened. "I'm sorry," she said again, her voice breaking. Chief Hayes didn't say anything more. He simply turned and walked toward his son. Together, father and son climbed into the police car and drove off, leaving Samantha sitting there in her minivan, feeling more exposed than she ever had before. That evening, the incident spread like wildfire. The story was soon all over social media, the local news, and the gossip mill of Hartsville. People had taken to Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to voice their opinions, many defending Jordan, some questioning Samantha's intentions, others offering support. The town that had once seemed so small, so familiar, now felt suffocating. The judgment, the shame, everything she had hoped to avoid was now spilling into her life in ways she couldn't control. The next morning, Samantha woke to a barrage of texts, emails, and social media notifications. Headlines flashed before her eyes. "White woman calls police on black teen," speechless when she realizes he's the police chief's son. She scrolled through comments, her face growing redder with each one. Some defended her, claiming she was just doing what she thought was best. But others were unforgiving, accusing her of racial profiling, of making assumptions based solely on the color of a teenager's skin. Samantha sat at her kitchen table, staring at the phone in her hands. She felt like she had no place to hide. She had made a terrible mistake, and now the whole town knew. Later that day, she took a deep breath, picked up her phone, and dialed Chief Hayes' number. The line rang, and when he answered, his voice was steady. "Hello, Chief Hayes?" Samantha's voice was shaky. "It's Samantha Hill. I owe you an apology." There was a long pause before he responded, his voice calm but firm. "You do, but an apology isn't enough. You need to understand why you did what you did." "I do," Samantha said, swallowing the lump in her throat. "And I'll do better. I'm so sorry, I was wrong. I hope you'll take this as a lesson," Chief Hayes said quietly. "We all have work to do. The first step is acknowledging our mistakes." Samantha nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "I will. Thank you for giving me the chance to make it right." She hung up the phone, feeling the weight of her own privilege pressing down on her. The lesson had been a hard one, but it was one she would never forget. And in the weeks that followed, Samantha found herself looking at her town differently. at her neighbors, at her family, and at herself. The road ahead wasn't easy, but she was determined to learn, determined to change. The hardest part, she realized, wasn't asking for forgiveness. It was understanding why she had needed to ask at all.